The night Alexander the Great was born, and how he interrogated and impressed the Persian envoys. Alexander the Great lived about 330 BC. And we know that in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, the archangel Gabriel gave prophecies to the prophet Daniel concerning Alexander the Great. Now, on the night of Alexander's birth, according to tradition, the temple of Artemis was burned. The local Persian magicians interpreted this as an omen of other disasters that would follow. Quote, they ran back and forth, slapping their faces and shouting that morning that great calamity for Asia had been born that day, end quote. An arson is destined to destroy the entire East. Similarly, the night before her wedding, Olympiada, that is Alexander the Great's mother, dreamt that an axe had pierced her, fire came out of her womb, and spread far and wide before it was extinguished. A couple of months later, Philip had a dream. He was sealing his wife's vagina, in other words, putting a chastity belt on her, and the candle bore the image of a lion. Some of the oracles of the palace thought that this meant that Philip should watch his wife more closely. The thing is that he was going off on a war campaign, and he would have left his wife for a long time. But he did that. He did leave for war, and then when he came back, he found her pregnant. Now, let's remember that I've quite some time ago made a video on one of the last pharaohs of Egypt, Nectanebo, who had to flee for his life because they were trying to do away with him. And he left Cairo, Egypt, to go to Salonika in northern Greece, where the palace of Philip was. Philip was Alexander the Great's father. And Nectanebo stayed there as a magician. And he supposedly was dousing Olympiada, Alexander's mother, with various potions that made her drowsy, and supposedly they had relations, and that Nectanebo was the actual biological father of Alexander the Great. Well, anyway, when Philip returned from his war campaigns, he found his wife pregnant. That's why he he sent her away. He disowned Alexander, saying he was not his biological son. He married a younger woman and told everybody that Alexander was, he disowned Alexander as not being his biological son. This is all part of history. When Alexander became king of Macedonia and all of Greece, and then when he went to visit Egypt, he asked the Egyptian priests there if he was a god, and they said, "Yes, you are the son. You are a god because you are the son of God." In other words, they knew that he was the biological result of Nectanebo and Olympia. Nectanebo, one of the last pharaohs of Egypt. Now we know that Alexander the Great took all of that area. After Alexander died, the empire was divided into four. And that's the beginning of the Ptolemy era of Egypt. So in fact, Nectanebo, his father, Alexander's biological father, was actually a pharaoh of the last pharaoh of Egypt. So that's just a recap. But going back to this. So a couple of months later, Philip had a dream. He was sealing his wife's vagina, in other words, locking her into her chastity belt, and the candle bore the image of a lion. Some of the oracles of the palace, I don't even know how. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure out what that would entail. How would you lock your wife? Oh my God. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't know. If anybody has any idea of how a chastity belt was worn or placed by a man onto his wife, please let me know, because I have no idea. I think this is still done in some places of the East. I don't want to name, but, before the couple goes on an air flight or, from one place to the other, that's what, the woman has to wear a chastity belt. I'm sorry. I don't know what that entails. But anyway, if you know, please let me know. Leave it in the comments. But anyway, going back to this. But Aristander of Telmessos, who later accompanied Alexander to Asia, had a more plausible explanation. Olympias, his mother, was pregnant with a robust son, brave as a lion, no one, he told Philip, seals an empty jar. Philip and the oracle from the Oracle of Delphi, there was also a rumor that the king had once peeked out of a crevice in his bedroom and saw Olympias embracing a snake. All right, what can I tell you? Yeah, they had these cults at that time. Now, the obvious explanation that it was just one of her animals in the context of her Dionysian cult did not cross his mind. Convinced that she was either a witch or mistress of a disguised god, he began to avoid marital relations with her. In fact, he was so upset that he turned to the Oracle of Delphi for his problems and got a very specific answer. This is it. From now on, he was told that he should pay special attention, special respect to Amon Zeus being someplace in Egypt, the Hellenized Egyptian deity whose temple and oracle were located in the oasis of Shiva on the border with Libya. He would also lose the eye he had seen the god in the form of a reptile sharing his wife's bed. I'm sorry, this is exactly what was written. This was the oracle given by the Oracle of Delphi. Legends like this have always tended to be created around the birth and childhood of famous people in antiquity. It was out of the question for birth to be accompanied by omens and for childhood to be rich in events that foreshadow future greatness. In Alexander's case, relentless propaganda, both favorable and hostile, began very early, before he even became king. The most revealing detail is a prediction about the eye of Philip, which was actually lost in the siege of Methone in 354 BC, 2 years after the birth of Alexander. This incident created much later a springboard for the false oracle designed to reinforce Alexander's arrogant claim to be considered divine in nature. The temple of Artemis in Ephesus was burned at about that time, but the prophecy of an arsonist who would destroy Asia seems suspiciously like Persian propaganda, which was practiced when the invasion had already taken place. The childhood years of Alexander. The truth is that we have surprisingly very little direct information about Alexander's childhood from any source. It's presented as a prematurely developed infant terrible, and this is quite possible. Life in the Macedonian court, with its controversies and intrigues, drowned parties, and obscene sexual perversions, was not intended to motivate a young man to innocence. Early development is exactly what we would expect from a smart boy who grew up in such an environment. When Alexander was only 7 years old, he's said to have hosted a group of Persian envoys during Philip's absence on a campaign. They had arrived carrying a pardon on behalf of the Greek king and a request for the return of 3 rebels who had taken refuge in the court of Philip: the Menapi of Egypt, the satrap Artavazos, and the Greek mercenary leader Memnon of Rhodes. After the usual exchange of compliments, Alexander began to interrogate them, quote-unquote, exhaustively, as if he were a counterintelligence officer. The all-admiring questions about wonders such as the Hanging Gardens or the Persian royal symbols or the golden vine of the great king did not suit him. What he wanted to know, or so we are asked to believe, were things like the size and morale of the Persian army, the duration of the trip to Susa, and the condition of the roads leading there. Isn't that something? I mean, he wanted to know about the tactical things. This anecdote was apparently embellished for propaganda purposes, but it could contain elements of truth. The envoys, says Plutarch, were very impressed by little Alexander. Whether they told him what he wanted to know is another matter. But Artavasios and Memnon at least are unlikely to have forgotten the incident, if indeed it did happen. Out of curiosity, the former later became one of Alexander's satraps in the east, while the latter was his most formidable opponent in Asia Minor. Memnon, unlike his Persian employers, never had the mistake of underestimating Alexander. It's irritating to think that this great soldier might have remembered and taken as a warning the disturbing greed of a 7-year-old child. And the source is Alexander the Great Mercenary of History, Peter Green, Dioptra Publications, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.